you know, in recent years, from my own work on EU projects and working with EU clients, is that there was a tendency in the past to leave communication to this idea of a dissemination work package that would kind of kick in year four of many projects. But there's loads of advantages to actually doing two-way communication from the very beginning of a project, as I'm sure most of you already know and probably do already. And the other thing about it, of course, is that the European Commission looks very favourably on communication happening throughout a project. So when they're assessing grant applications, if you can kind of demonstrate in your proposal that you're taking a strategic view to communications, that you're engaging for impact with a broad audience, and that you've got good frameworks in place to do that, then we've seen those kind of proposals get scored more highly. So just to go into this a little bit more, I suppose the one thing, and Emily touched on it a bit there actually, with your move from X to LinkedIn, it's not business as usual anymore, the world of communications. And that's all down to one man in particular, Mr. Musk, who has, I think it'd be fair to say, pretty much single-handedly destroyed Twitter as a platform. But having said that, I still think that it is possible to use social media for good. You just have to do it strategically and do it in the right places and lean into platforms like LinkedIn as you're doing. And more broadly, I suppose it is, something I really believe strongly in, that communications is at the heart of the success of all EU projects, to a smaller or greater extent, depending on the nature of the project. But communications, both digital, online, and offline, is very much at the heart of things. So I suppose a big thing I try and do in the projects I'm involved with is get, it might be called Work Package 5 or whatever for communications, but get it more involved in the actual main project work packages. And I suppose, just to note, the traditional approach was really about this kind of idea of end of project dissemination, where you're waiting till all the results are in, and then and only then do you start releasing a summary or report. But there's a more modern approach which works better, and which the commission really values, and funders in general really value, which is this idea of kind of ongoing engagement, gathering feedback, and a regular sharing of progress, not just with the EU project officer, but with your audiences and your stakeholders. And the audiences are really key to it. I mean, I think that I always recommend people do, and it can be hard, but it's really important, is to take an audience first approach. So to really think about what your audience wants to hear, and also where they're spending time. So there's no point communicating in the wrong place if your audience isn't there. And a big part of that is recognizing the diversity of your audiences. There might be funders, there might be professionals and other nonprofits, might be young people. I think one of the speakers earlier on mentioned the move towards communicating with young people. They could be local communities, and they could be the broader general public. Although I guess I'd always say to try and divide up that general public into different categories if you can. And the other thing that's really useful is to get feedback from those people, and to build that into your project where possible. You don't have to over engineer that or over complicate that, because it's often not possible to change the whole direction of a project, but it is good to consult and gather input. So for example, I'm working on a project at the moment which will be creating an animated video series for primary school students to help them understand the world of disinformation, and that not everything they see on the internet is real. And as part of that process, because we're very conscious, we're dealing with 9 to 12-year-olds, and we don't want the 12-year-olds to think that the animation style is kind of too childish or patronizing. So as part of that process, we're actually going to design two sets of characters, and we're going to run an online survey with schools and the students in the schools where they get to vote for which is their favorite character. So it's it's not changing the course of the whole project, but it is changing the creative approach. I think that's so doing that kind of thing can be really useful. And then of course it improves transparency as well. If you can get your communications out there more regularly, and even if you don't have anything to report just yet, it kind of builds anticipation for the results. So communications um, as an ongoing thing has loads of advantages. So I suppose the question then arises, well, how do you do it, and where do you communicate? And more importantly, how do you engage for impact really? Because that's I suppose ultimately what your project's going to be evaluated for is, are you hitting your KPIs, and can you demonstrate impact? So I'll just give a quick run through of the different platforms, and then I'll talk a bit about the strategies for them. So, you know, X, formerly Twitter, used to be a great place, and not so much anymore. Kind of got a little bit toxic, but important to remember that a lot of journalists are still there, so it's a good place for getting to them. And there are actually quite active conversations on a lot of topics. Now they can go rapidly downhill, but it is worth factoring X into your campaigns still. But I think, as Emily mentioned earlier, Christina, you emphasised as well, everyone's moving to LinkedIn now because the conversations there are much more positive. There's less toxicity, and the algorithm generally works better. And particularly if you're dealing with professional audiences, where kind of the sectors of the job titles that you're trying to engage with, then LinkedIn is really good. But if we're dealing with kind of older cohorts, perhaps in certainly in Ireland, Facebook would be still very relevant for certain groups. So wouldn't rule it out. But if you're dealing with younger people, then Instagram is a great place to be. And it's important to remember with Instagram that it's not just about photographs anymore in the feed. There's this whole move towards stories and reels, short videos, kind of done in vertically, which are, hugely popular with people who are younger than me. I do use Instagram, but there's other. I do also watch television, but I know some of my colleagues only get all their content almost from Instagram. But YouTube is bigger than ever, really, as well. It's worth pointing out. There is a tendency in the European communications world to see YouTube as kind of a repository for video content. But it's really much more than that, because people go onto YouTube, they do a lot of searches. And also, when people search in Google, because Google owns YouTube, YouTube videos tend to show up quite high. So it's worth thinking about using YouTube, not just as a repository, but also as a way of reaching your audience through, it's kind of almost a form of search engine optimization. It's getting the video title right, getting the description right, and things like that. So you can use YouTube like that. And the other important thing is that YouTube is catching up with Instagram with this idea of YouTube Shorts and other types of video for young people, which is where a lot of my kids spend their time. The other place young people in Ireland and elsewhere spend a huge amount of time is TikTok. Um, and in a sense, YouTube and Instagram with their vertical video are trying to catch up with TikTok. But I would just sound a note of caution about TikTok as a platform, because the European Commission doesn't like it. They worry about the Chinese military industrial complex. So, for political reasons, I would downplay or omit even any mention of TikTok from your proposals, because it'll just ring a red flag in a European context. So just worth bearing that in mind. Even though it would be a great way of reaching audiences, particularly younger people in Ireland, you might be better off going with Instagram and YouTube for those audiences. Important to remember, I know you're going to be overhauling your own website, but project websites are really great hubs for content. You can actually link out to all your platforms from there. It can become a kind of a go-to place. And again, with the right search engine optimization, it can bubble up quite high in the search engine the search engine results. And then the other thing to mention, of course, is that you were talking earlier about maybe four people or more being involved, four partners or more being involved in a project. So your partner websites can link back to the project website as well. Or your project website might actually be a subsection on one of your partner websites. So those interlinkages are really important because it shows to Google that it's not just an isolated platform. Um, Email is a huge thing, and well worth trying to activate as much as possible. It's important to use a tool for like Mailchimp or GetResponse because you can automate things. But I know you have a very active mailing this in the wheel already. But for just individual projects, it's good to have a mailing list because what it does is it means much more than kind of the scattergun approach of social media. It means you can actually start to build up a community of practice or a community around your work. But useful to use those online platforms. And then also one of the things I wanted to mention was EU survey. So we tend to use WhatsApp polls or Google Forms a lot in Ireland um, for quick surveys and things like that. But there is actually an EU tool from the Commission called EU Survey, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And just a reminder that that's actually it's a bit clunky, it's kind of hard to use, but it's well worth using for European projects because it's GDPR compliant out of the box, and it's also surveys in general are a very good way of getting feedback from your target audience in a way that doesn't take them a huge amount of time. You could run a 3-question survey on something, or like that example I mentioned earlier on of the cartoon characters. It's just going to be which is your favorite, A or B. So it's keeping it very simple is effective. And of course, webinars and sessions like this one we're having now at the moment are really powerful as well. So there's a whole lot of different channels you could use, but one thing I would mention is that it's really important that you try and have a kind of a coherent and impressive project branding and visual identity for your projects. I'm sure many of you do this already, but it's just good to recap it, because that kind of strong branding, really helps your project stand out, especially when you're on all these different channels. It's a bit fragmented. So when I talk about branding, I guess I mean the logo, the colors you use, and also having templates like these lovely wheel backgrounds for Zoom and things like that. They can really help just increase the impact of a project. And another thing that's really important and is to get the messaging around the project kind of agreed. So a description, a one-liner, a paragraph, maybe a page, different formats that describe your project so that all partners describe it in the same way. Because I'm involved in a project at the moment, and every time you ask someone what the project is about, you get a different answer. So it's useful just to have all that agreed. Of course, useful to measure things as well. The you're swamped with data from all these digital platforms, so you kind of have this analytics level. But when you're making decisions, you kind of need to just look at a few of them. And then when you're reporting up to your project consortium board level or the European Commission, you're going to pick and choose what you're reporting. So just useful to remember that not all analytics are created equal. And just before I wrap up and dive into some proposal tips, it's worth mentioning that you can actually flip that kind of metrics pyramid upside down and turn it into what looks like a marketing funnel, which is a useful way of doing things as well. So if we were to think about, you want to report to the board that you have 1,000 email subscribers, you're going to have to send many emails out. So what you might do at your analytics level is track how many emails you're sending a month and how many people are opening them. And then at coordination level, you might decide to change what you're putting in those emails to get more interaction. But then at board level, what you're reporting back to the commission or to your project board, your consortium board might be, yes, we hit our target of 1,000 subscribers. So just a little bit conscious of time, so I'll just jump on quickly now just to wrap up with some proposal tips. So they're kind of that's a broad overview there, but I suppose a big thing to remember is that the EU always puts an emphasis on citizen involvement. And that was, I suppose, evident even in some of the open call titles we looked at earlier on, because these challenges affect all citizens. So it's important to spell that out in your proposal, how you're addressing it for wider citizens. Many EU calls explicitly require a mention of public engagement, so it's good to touch on that in your proposals, of course. And a big driver for that is this whole idea of visibility and outreach and democratic legitimacy. So just important to remember how important that is actually to the commission. So I saw a project recently that scored very low in their first grant application because they were talking about kind of, it was almost internal communications in their world, but when and they got evaluated low for that. But when they went back with our help and talked about reaching citizens as well, they got full marks in the communications piece. So, and a good way to get full marks in these sections is to use acronyms. So there's different frameworks you can use. I'm happy to send links to these afterwards if anyone's interested. But there's one framework you can use to describe your communication strategy, which is called the RACE framework: reach, act, convert, engage. There's another one called the PESO model, where it's paid, earned, shared, owned, which kind of, you remember I showed all those different channels earlier on. This is a way of kind of organizing them. Um, and then there's one I made myself actually very proud of this one called the Zeus Principles. This is based on my own experience and some academic research as well. And this is about tapping into the zeitgeist, trying to use emotion in your communications. I'd say Troker, for example, be very good on that. The Cancer Society as well, who we also work with. Making your content useful is really important, and where you can. And this is something that NGOs are particularly well placed to do, is to tell human stories. So the Zeus principles help you with each piece of content or a series of content to actually create something that people like and engage with online. So I suppose the key point here with these proposal tips is that I've seen that tenders and grant applications that mention those kind of acronyms and give that kind of structure get evaluated high, because it gives the evaluators something to hang on to when they're evaluating, and they can see that you're not just throwing kind of a random hodgepodge of communication channels together, that you actually have a strategy. And yeah, I guess that's the key thing really, is having that strategy, not just in the proposal, of course, but actually implementing it as well during the project. So, and making sure that communications is more than just a work package that gets wrapped up in year 4 is the other thing that's really useful. So I hope that's helpful. Very happy to answer any questions anyone has now. I've gone a little bit over time. Sorry about that, but thank you very much.